All right, guys, welcome to Job 24. Now, we've got to go back to Job 23 and get a refresher because it's been a couple days. So let's go back here. So let's read the last five. But he is unique, and who can make him change? And whatever his soul desires, that he does. For he performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. Therefore I am terrified at his presence. When I consider this, I am afraid of him. For God made my heart weak, and the Almighty terrifies me, because I was not cut off from the presence of darkness, and he did not hide a deep darkness from my face. So now, good morning. So now we go into Job 24, because he's continuing his speech here. Job complains of violence on the earth. Since times are not hidden from the Almighty, why do those who know him see not his days? Some remove landmarks. They seize flocks violently and feed on them. Remove landmarks. That's interesting because that's something that's happening in Israel. That's what they're doing now with the Palestinians. In fact, that's one of the biggest complaints everybody has is that they're removing more landmarks. That's interesting. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. Basically, taking more than what they should when it's not fair to do so. They push the needy off the road. That happens a lot. All the poor of the land are forced to hide. That's okay. That's literally what's happening now. And it's funny because if you're caught feeding them, I mean, like whenever you're going to give somebody who's homeless something, you got to do it quick and leave. Because if somebody sees it, they complain. And no, the police will come. And you can get charged for it. That's in almost every state. It's shocking. Like I feared that a lot of the homeless are like, well, somebody comes up and they give stuff and then they make it quick and then they leave. I hope that they don't take it personally, but they got to realize that we can get in trouble for doing that nowadays. In most states, that's ridiculous. It's like Austin, they used to go and set up tables and feed the homeless under the overpasses. There was one in particular. Back off the way. Nobody was in the road. Everything was quiet. Nobody was, causing any problems. Police came up and shut it down to the point that there was a small group of motorcyclists. And when they went and got those little Groms, and it's a little tiny motorcycle. In fact, there's a guy that lives out here that has one. And they had these little bags they attached their handlebars. And they would load them up with individual hot dogs on a bun wrapped with mustard and ketchup, wrapped up in foil. And they would run around as a group and they would go and they'd ride up to the poor, hand them a couple of hot dogs, and they'd ride off. And they just started hitting all these spots where all the poor were running real fast so nobody could catch them. But that's what they had to do because otherwise you could get fined for doing it. So like if they would have walked, they'd have gotten busted. So they took off. And it was funny because one guy actually ended up getting pulled over in the group. And so because they have in their helmet, in your helmet, you can put a little device where you can Bluetooth. So he called the rest of the group because the cops stopped him, asked him what he was doing. They, well, we have reports you guys were feeding poor over here and stuff like that. And so they checked his bag. He had no more hot dogs left. He's like, I'm just riding. And so he called real quick and said, hey, all y'all get rid of all your hot dogs as fast as you can, and because the cops are pulling over. Ultimately, the police ended up contacting every one of them because they got their license plate numbers because they were going to try to find them for doing that. That's ridiculous. And Job's talking about this. And it's the same thing happening today. They're getting pushed off the road. All the poor of the land are forced to hide. Incredible. Number 5, indeed, like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out to their work, searching for food. The wilderness yields food for them and for their children. They gather their fodder in the field and glean in the vineyard of the wicked. They spend the night naked, without clothing, and have no covering in the cold. They are wet with the showers of the mountains and huddle around the rock for want of shelter. Some snatch the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge from the poor. They cause the poor to go naked, without clothing. And they take away the sheaves from the hungry. They press out oil within their walls and tread wine presses, yet suffer thirst. The dying groan in the cities, which means they work and don't get paid. The dying groan in the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out, yet God does not charge them with wrong. So here's where Job is. He's looking at all the wrong being done and wondering why God lets it continue. Why does God allow so many people to die? Why does he allow disasters to happen? That's the same question people have today. Same question. In fact, most people, that's what their initial argument will start as. Why does God allow so much travesty in the world? Why does he allow so much death and suffering? Job is doing the same thing. See, Job doesn't understand. He understands, but he doesn't. He's wondering why this happens. Why is this a thing? Why does this happen? Why is this allowed to happen? Well, because there's a judgment coming for that stuff. We know that now because we have more of the book. I imagine he didn't have any scripture. But the fact that he knows about this tells us something. That those thousands of years ago, it was the same situation, which is what's happening today. Verse 13, there are those who rebel against the light. They do not know its ways, nor abide in its paths. The murderer rises with the light. He kills the poor and the needy, and in the night he is like a thief. Now that kind of murder, that's hatred. So even all the way back at this time, they still understood hatred was murder. Jesus reminded the Pharisees of that. Verse 15, the eye of the adulterer waits for the twilight, saying, no eye will see me. And he disguises his face. In the dark they break into houses, which they marked for themselves in the daytime. They do not know the light. Go to watch the movie Home Alone. They were doing that in that movie. That's how they do today. Scope it out in the daytime, go out at night and break into it. Verse 17, for the morning is the same to them as the shadow of death. If someone recognizes them, they are in the terrors of the shadows of death. They should be swift on the face of the waters. Their portion should be cursed in the earth, so that no one would turn into the way of their vineyards. As drought and heat consume the snow waters, so the grave consumes those who have sinned. The womb should forget him. The worm should feed sweetly on him. He should be remembered no more, and wickedness should be broken like a tree. For he preys on the barren who do not bear, and does no good for the widow. But God draws the mighty away with his power. He rises up, but no man is sure of life. He gives them security, and they rely on it. Yet his eyes are on their ways. They are exalted for a little while. Then they are gone. They are brought low. They are taken out of the way like all others. They dry out like the heads of grain. Now, if it is not so, who will prove me a liar and make my speech worth nothing? So Job, seeing the things that have been happening. See, there's a lot more going on with Job's story than just the stuff that the first chapter talked about. I think there was a whole lot more going on. So, what Job is saying is, I see all these things happening. Why is it happening? This should not be. And this is all of our complaint. Why is it like this? Why are so many children today being put in so much suffering when there's no reason for it? At the hands of adults who were supposed to take care of them. Why is so much evil happening in the world? Why does God allow this? Well, because there's a plan. And we've come to the place now where we've learned that the Lord has a plan for all this. There's a day of judgment set aside for the purpose of dealing with all these things. But what God does, as the Bible tells us, all things work for the good of those that love him. So all these things he uses to work for our betterment. What is seeing all that evil do drives us closer to him. But if that evil didn't exist, where would be the sudden desire to go to the Lord? Where could we hide? Where could we stay in order to... What would make us need to run to him if there was no evil in the world? If everything was good, we would just keep to live our life. There would be no need to run to God. You never fear until there's something to fear. You never run to safety unless there's danger. So if none of this stuff was happening, if the world was perfect, nobody would even think about God. So all this evil has a purpose. Because what this does, even though we are troubled by it, even though we're bothered by it, what this does is this causes us to go to the Lord. Because we don't want to be a part of this. We don't want to see these things unfold like this. We desire him, so we go to him. Father, help. And through the process of the Word, reading the Word and studying, we come to the realization that help is coming. Now, there are a lot of things that are going on that we still don't fully understand, but we know it's all part of what he's doing. He will allow these things to happen until the time comes when judgment is going to reign. True justice. Truth. His truth. And then all that's going to change. Now, Job doesn't know this or see this. So, just like everybody else that has ever lived, we question, why is this like this? Why is there so much suffering? There was an Iron Sharpens Iron meeting that I did at my last church, and we were talking about Christian persecution. And I found a picture and a story that was associated with it. So on one of my PowerPoint slides, I had that on there. And it was a picture, and this is a little graphic, but it was a picture, and it was a bunch of people that had been burned alive out in front of a church. And it was over in way deep in another country. But what the rebels, the people that were fighting the government and all that had done, they decided, we're going to kill all the Christians around here. The Christians weren't doing anything to anybody. They were staying to themselves. But what they did was they went in, a couple of guys went in with guns and was rounding everybody up in the church and running them out. Well, in the meantime, guys outside were dumping 55-gallon drums of fuel on the ground. And so the ground had a puddle of fuel on it. Big one. And so the people ran it. They ran everybody out of the church. And they had them all lined up outside, lit the fuel on fire. And watched them all run around and burn to death. 56 people, I think, is what the number was. Took out a whole church in some countries. And then they tore the church up, tore it down. And we look at that and go, Lord, why did you let all those that were yours die? And we question, why did you let that happen to them? Well, some people are marked out for martyrdom. Those people were martyred for the Lord. What an honor. And we look at it, it's a terrible situation, but when you look at it from God's perspective, it's an honor and a privilege to be chosen to be martyred for the name of the Lord, and they were martyred for that. Now, from our perspective, it's horrible. From Job's perspective, this would have been something horrible. But when we look at it from God's perspective, we realize, oh, wait a minute. Oh, that was actually an incredible blessing he gave them. Now, from our perspective, it's like, no, this isn't a blessing. I'm burning alive. What the heck? When we really start to look at it and think about it, we start to realize, wait a minute. So these things that are happening aren't because God hates me. It's because he loves me and has found me worthy to experience these things. So persecution isn't given to everybody. The Lord will find you worthy to suffer persecution. That's a wonderful thing to have. The mentality of the Christian changes over time to start to realize these things are actually good things. Because we start to see it more from his perspective, not ours. Job has not experienced that. So he's looking at the world from his perspective, and he sees these horrible things, not understanding that this is the plan of the Lord. So he's also coming from a place of what happened to him at the beginning. Everything that I had was taken. All my animals were killed or stolen. My kids were all killed because a house fell on them. My wife left me. Now my friends are sitting here beating me up, and nobody wants to help me at all. And I did a whole lot of good stuff for other people. But Job doesn't realize that what's happened to him is for his betterment. What's happened to him is a good thing. God used this as a wonderful opportunity to bless Job that much more. Because what happens at the end, and we'll get there, but what happens at the end? Job gets a better wife, more kids, and has twice as much as what he had before. So even though there was suffering, what God brought out of that suffering was remarkable and incredible. But Job can't see this. And this is where we all are. We see these things, we're like, whoa, wait a minute. But you will come to a place where people will look at you and see you as indifferent, but you'll look at it and you're troubled by it, but you know the Lord has a plan for it and he's going to deal with it. You come to a place where you're so entrenched in trusting in the Lord that you'll see horrible things and go, but I know the Lord's got this under control. He has everything under control, and this is going to work out for the betterment. This is going to work out for the good because I love him, and his Bible says that. All things work for the good of those that love him. So Job is in a perspective of he doesn't know that. There was no Bible back then, as far as I know. So he doesn't know these things. So he's seeing this and reacting accordingly. And he's actually part of having a personal experience in it. And so it's troubling him, so he's complaining about that. But he's speaking from a certain perspective. But there's another perspective to consider, and he hasn't done that yet. Now, God's going to show him that. But the key is his friends. Because Job is responding to his friends. They're not responding back accordingly. Instead, they're responding back in hatred. So they're, by their own actions, being exposed for who they really are. This is all part of the plan that God is doing also. So it's amazing to watch this and read this. And these are the little hidden details in the speech. But when you look at it from this perspective, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. This actually really does apply. So pertinent, so applicable is it now, all these thousands of years later. And it's a great picture to show you that even back then, and this was, 4,500 years ago? Something like that, maybe, we don't know exactly. It just goes to show you mankind hasn't changed at all in millennia. I find that very interesting. But that tells me that God hasn't changed either. Because he's still doing the same work he was doing all back then. Amazing. Guys, that was Job 24. Job's right in his complaint. He's justified. We're justified in complaining about these horrible things. But when we do, we need to do it from a place of we know what the Lord is doing and we know what he has planned. And while it may be terrible to think that someone we know and love may end up in hell, it's justice. Because that person was probably never going to receive salvation. He was never going to choose God. And the Lord knows that. And so, it goes the way it's supposed to go. And some of the most horrible situations bring about so much of the most incredible levels of faith. And so, God's plan is, bring us into the sheepfold. Sometimes it's a little painful getting through the gate. But he knows best because he sees from all perspectives. So there's a lot Job doesn't know, but we can relate to him on most levels. But we have the unique perspective of being able to see this from the outside. And so we already know where this is going to lead. But it's lessons for us in our everyday life. It's things we can learn and see them and how applicable they are to our everyday life. And we can learn from it and grow from it. So again, that was Job 24. The next video will be Job 25. Bildad's super short speech. Super short. And he gets real nasty in this too because he starts calling him names. And so it's going to be, and I don't know, I think Job immediately responds. Yeah. But he's not responding so much to his friends anymore. It's more like he's talking to God. But he's sharing very interesting tidbits of information with his friends. If they were listening, they would have caught it. So we'll see what they have to say in the next video. Guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.